This is the June 20th Planning and Zoning Commission. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Connie Yoshimura.
Here.
Bruce Phelps. Stacy Dean.
Here.
Terry Parks.
Here.
Dana Pruse.
Here.
Ray Hickle.
Here.
Peter Mulcahy.
Here.
James Ferguson.
Here.
Tyler Robinson.
Here.
All right, thank you very much. We do have a quorum. There are no minutes for us to review and approve. So we'll move on to item number C, special order of business disclosures. Vice Chair Parks, will you handle disclosures, please?
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner Dean?
No.
Commissioner Hickle?
Yeah, I have no conflicts.
Commissioner Pruse?
No.
Commissioner Robinson?
No.
Mr. Ferguson?
I have two. First, with regards to case S11929-1, request for reconsideration of two variances and postponement of plat approval. I was not present at the June 11th hearing. I have reviewed the material and listened to the meeting audio, and I am prepared to participate. Also, on the same case, ML&P and Chugach Electric are jointly building a power plant that will feed this case. That power plant is being constructed by SNC Loveland. I have a subcontract with SNC Loveland to manage their unionized labor relations on that project. I just wish to make that disclosure.
You do not have any financial relationship with any of the companies that are involved?
No.
MLP. Good. Thank you. And what is the feeling of the commission? Any issues with him participating? Yes. Need to make a motion, I guess, that we have the commission vote on that, whether he should participate or not.
A motion by Terry Parks and a second by Ray Hickle to direct Commissioner Ferguson to participate. Is there any objection? Seeing and hearing none, you are directed to participate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you please note for the record that Commissioner Phelps has arrived and, yeah, okay.
Commissioner Mulcahy?
No disclosure.
Okay. And Commissioner Phelps?
No.
Commissioner Yoshimura?
No.
And I have none.
All right. Thank you very much. Moving on to item C2, case S11929-1, reconsideration of variances from AMC 2180.010 dedication streets and AMC 2185.030.A improvement requirements by improvement area. This is not a public hearing. May I have a motion for reconsideration from Commissioner Dean on the approval of case S11921-1. That's been a motion to reconsider has been made by Ms. Dean. It's been seconded by Commissioner Parks. Commissioner Dean, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, my denying of the variance would require the applicant to follow the same rules of any other developer. This would also could potentially put them into a fee in lieu situation. I believe they have the option of that. Not totally clear on exactly how that would work, but I believe that it is much more fair to the other landowners in that area.
All right, we need to vote on the motion to reconsider. Do I see any objection to the reconsideration? Oh, well, we'll vote. Let's go ahead and let's vote. This would, vote yes would approve the motion to reconsider. A vote no would be no. All right. The main motion is now back before the commission as follows. The motion on the floor is Commissioner Dean moved to approving case S11929-1, a variance from AMC 2180.010 dedication streets with a clarification that the motion includes Department Recommendation A subsection 1, recording a suitable plat within 18 months of approval. Commissioner Parks seconded. We now need a motion to amend the main motion. Ms. Dean.
I need to amend the main motion. I'm not clear on exactly how that works.
Could we have some help from the secretary, please?
Now that the main motion's back on the floor, you would move to reconsider, and so if there's any changes or any additions you want to make to that first variance, then now's the time to make any amendments that you might have.
If I wanted to deny the variance, then we would still have to vote and then vote it down, correct? I would have to move to approve and then suggest that we deny it and then vote no, correct?
Okay. The motion is on the table, the main motion to approve. Okay? If you have no amendments, then we won't, if there's no amendments, then there's nothing to move, and we will deal with the main motion on the table, and it'll either vote up or vote down on the variance. If you fail it, that variance is done.
All right, so as I understand it, this vote would be on the main motion, which would be to approve the variance.
I guess okay, so say that again, what I need to do? I am really foggy, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's quite all right. Mr. Whitfield's in the queue, so maybe, Mr. Whitfield, can you help us out here for a second?
Madam Chair, just for clarification, there are two variances here. The commission has the option to break up the two variances and vote on them separately. I just want to put that out there. It seems as though we're going in a direction of one vote for both variances. I want to give you that option.
Just a point of clarification, you moved for the first variance,
Yes.
right? We only have one variance on the table at the moment. So,
All right.
So
your option is to clarify, speak to the motion, moving in favor or against it, and then everyone would vote. If it fails, then that variance is off the table. Just
Okay.
like a case would be off the table.
Okay,
And then the second variance, I believe, was the one that the fee in lieu was most discussed under, but I have,
the fee in lieu referred to the first variance.
oh, it did, okay. So what you
I
would
believe
need-
no, people are nodding, are shaking their heads at me and saying that the fee in lieu was for number 2. Okay.
So at this point, the motion's on the floor. If you'd like to do any kind of amendments with regard to fee in lieu or anything else that you want to modify, now's the time to do it. If not, and you have no amendments, then we'll just vote on the main motion, and you could call for the question.
Which is the variance, which is
The
the
first
first variance.
Yes.
All right.
So I move to approve the first variance. I will not support my motion, and I am under the belief that they should have to follow the requirements of any other developer would have to follow. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Thank you.
that's your finding. Yes. All right, that motion has been seconded by Commissioner Pruse. Commissioner Pruse, do you have anything you'd like to say in addition to that? Okay.
It's actually seconded by Mr. Parks in the original motion. I'm sorry, hang on.
Well, you can reset it. All right.
Here's where we're at. It doesn't,
Well, you can fix it. All right. We have some discussion. Commissioner Robinson and then Commissioner Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will not be supporting the amendment. This variance has to do with slight relaxation of the right-of-way required in this area, and I believe that staff documented some of the constraints that exist in the area with some of the built structures, as well as I was satisfied with staff's response of being able to certainly build a sufficient urban street section within the 50-foot of right-of-way that would be accomplished even after the variance. Thank you.
So you are supporting the variance?
I think the motion is to deny the first variance, which has to do with the right-of-way.
Excuse me. The motion is always to support the variance.
Okay.
And so...
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
I will be supporting
the variance.
The motion, yes.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Ferguson.
Commissioner Robinson's question answered mine, I thought. The first variance is on the right-of-way for the street. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Mr. Ferguson, you are correct. The first variance is with regard to the dedication of the streets, the right-of-way. Correct.
And what is the second?
Through the chair, Mr. Ferguson, the second variance is with regard to improvements of that right-of-way.
Thank you.
The need not to improve, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Commissioner Hickel.
I'd just like to support the variance as far as the questions that were answered from the paperwork. They were sufficient to me, and if there were any additional concerns I might have had, I don't view this as a particular developer as more as I view it as a public good, a utility. So I'll be supporting.
Are there any other comments? Shall we use our machines, please, we have a motion from Ms. Dean to support the variance, to approve the variance. It has been seconded by Mr. Parks. So, let's vote. All right, that motion passes. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, variance number 2. May we have a motion for reconsideration from Commissioner Dean? Thank you, Ms. Dean, and may we have a second? If there is no motion, there is no reconsideration. Thank you, Commissioner Phelps. Would Commissioner Dean speak to your motion?
I move to reconsider the variance number 2, which is a variance from AMC 21.85.030.A, improvement requirements by improvement area.
And it's been seconded by Commissioner Phelps. Would you like to speak to your motion?
After further consideration, we discussed the potential for a fee in lieu or some other method of covering the costs of improvements to that area. It was until after the meeting that we discussed these, and it became apparent that we may have made a mistake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any objection to the motion? Commissioner Robinson.
Yes, just to clarify, I think the conversation, while there are some difficulties in establishing a sort of fee in lieu accounting, it is in the code, it is applicable. I asked for clarification of why this variance is even needed at this time, given that it can be a further issue when the petitioner goes in for an actual building permit. So I personally will not be supporting this particular motion. In particular, it's been stated in the case that this area will redevelop, and given that redevelopment is likely, I think it's appropriate to seek financial participation in the area from other developers. Otherwise, whoever comes in at the end is going to be asked to foot 100% of the bill. And so for that reason, I think asking for, I'm not in favor of supporting this variance. And that said, I do not think that they should have to construct the road. I think the fee in lieu is a decent alternative to actually constructing the half street. Thanks.
And how would you address the amount for the fee in lieu?
I mean, I think the code lays out the standards on how that would happen. Again, they would come in for a building permit, and it strikes me that they could still decide at that stage to not require anything or negotiate that price or whatever. I just do not support the precedent of not allowing for allowing one developer to not have to participate in an improvement of a district and others too.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Phelps and then Commissioner Mulcahy.
I also will not be supporting the motion. I think that the reasons of Commissioner Robinson are valid. I think this area is in redevelopment, and that fee in lieu of is a way of ensuring that there's an equitable distribution of costs. It does exist as a section of code. The issue seems to be the allocation of funds. I tend to think that particular issue can be resolved by the administration. So I will not be supporting either.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Mulcahy.
I will not be supporting the motion, as Commissioner Phelps just said. Commissioner Robinson laid it out very, very succinctly. He made the points. The additional information provided us by staff in the interim since last meeting also lays out the conditions when a fee in lieu would be appropriate, and I believe this case meets those requirements. And as said, there will be some further resolution on how to actually implement it by the administration, but that's appropriate for them to figure that out, not this body. So I think, again, I will not be supporting the motion.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Dean, and then Commissioner Ferguson.
Madam Chair, I just want to clarify, we have actually two votes. We have one vote right now just to reconsider this motion, and then the second one will be of the variance itself. So am I correct on that? So I just want to clarify and make sure we're all on the same page.
All right, thank you, Ms. Dean. So we're moving for the reconsideration. Commissioner Ferguson, did you have a comment prior to the movement for reconsideration?
I'll bring it up on the next stage.
All right, okay, very good. Is there objection to the move for reconsideration? Seeing and hearing none, that motion is approved. Now, we're back to variance number 2. We've had a lot of discussion. Commissioner Ferguson, would you like to add your comments?
My question is, how do we assure ourselves that the funds collected go to what we intended they collect? I'm concerned with that. I've seen, and it bothers me to ask a petitioner to pay some money and then have it go for another service, and we have no protection right now, and that concerns me.
Commissioner Pruz?
I think the Attorney Wheeler explained that would be a separate dedicated fund. The municipality has the ability to do that.
Okay.
At the last meeting, he explained, at least I understood it, that should fee in lieu be implemented, that municipality deals with separated funds all the time.
All right, Commissioner Phelps.
I think that it's appropriate to put in the findings that the intention of this particular issue is for the funds to be utilized for the reconstruction of that general area.
Okay, thank you very much.
Madam Chairman, may I
Yes.
comment?
Yes, please.
The fee in lieu provision comes under the Department's authority in issuing land use and building permits. We have not established any kind of dedicated funds or accounts to use this mechanism. We've not used it, and we don't plan to use it in the near future. It's certainly a method that could be used. We need to look at it further to see how we could effectively implement it. But in this particular case, what you have before you is a platting requirement. The platting requirement in the code for peripheral and access improvements is strip paving. So you need to determine whether this improvement to the property meets the standards of the subdivision code for access and peripheral improvements, or if you think it needs to have a higher level of improvement, say perhaps a half-street improvement, you should make that decision here and now.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, the Secretary.
Just for the record, we had not stated that the motion that is back on the floor is to move to approve in case S11929-1, a variance from AMC 21.85.030.A, improvement requirements by improvement area, subject to recording a suitable plat within 18 months of approval. And I don't know if there were any amendments to that. But that was...
All right, thank you. Commissioner Pruse.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little confused because what Mr. Weaver explained to us is a little bit different than what the attorney, the municipal attorney, they may have not used it, but they have the ability to implement it. And I would think that if it's directed to implement it, then they would implement it, and the municipality administration would do that.
Would figure out a way to do it.
That's correct.
Yes, thank you. All right, good. Commissioner Robinson.
Thank you. Through the chair. Mr. Weaver, if you could, I thought that what was clear in the case is that it had been determined that a half-street urban section would be appropriate. And I think I would concur that half-street is appropriate. I would also concur that it makes no sense to build that half-street at this point, in which case what I thought from some of our exchanges previously is that when they came in for a building permit, instead of asking for that improvement, you could ask them for a fee in lieu. If you also decided to not ask for it, it sounded like you could also not ask for it as well. Could you speak to those questions?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Robinson, when they apply for their building permit, we would evaluate it just as we did for this case here. The staff determined that the level of improvements required of this application, the level of intensity of use of that property did not warrant a higher construction of the street. That doesn't mean that it won't be necessary in the future as the area further develops. When they come in for a building permit, we'll evaluate it again, but we will probably determine that the access as presently constructed is adequate.
And as I understand it, that access is a dirt alley?
I don't believe that's the case, Madam Chairman.
Okay.
But Dave can speak to that, and I believe it's strip pave on both on the east side and the south side.
Okay, Mr. Whitfield.
Madam Chair, both streets are strip paved.
right.
There are no dirt or gravel. Yeah, they are strip paved.
I guess it was just dirty when I was there. Thank you. All right. Commissioner Pruse.
So I'd like maybe some clarification from Mr. Weaver. So if it's determined that no additional upgrade is required for this, and the subsequent developers downstream come in, are they given the same consideration? And if not, do you have the ability, will you go back to the original, the first one up, so to speak, we'll call it this group, and assess them?
Madam Chair, Mr. Pruse, basically what we would do is look at that application, look at the intensity of that development, and determine whether the access improvement was appropriate. The strip paving still may be appropriate for the access into that development, but it really depends how it should be proportional. The improvements, what we strive to do is to exact improvements that are proportional to the intensity of the development. And it's challenging because we haven't had for decades a methodology of a fee in lieu or any other provision to incrementally put monies aside from each applicant. But what the boards and commissions and staff has done in the past is try to determine the code that we have in place that talks about peripheral and access improvements as to whether they're adequate. That's the mechanism that we've used up to date. We've never used this provision to do a dedicated fund. It takes a considerable amount of oversight to create the fund, to manage the fund, and to implement the fund. And we have not given it a lot of thought.
Let me ask a question of Mr. Whitfield. Could you remind this commission and myself what the zoning district is adjacent to the south of this project and the number of and the amount of density that could be possible there? And have you had any discussions with the owner of that property?
Madam Chair, may I have one moment to consult my Title 21?
Yes, certainly. Are there any other comments or questions at this time? Commissioner Ferguson and then Commissioner Robinson.
Just a clarification. The motion as it was stated was to approve with no fee in lieu or approve with a fee in lieu.
Without.
So the motion is approve it without a fee in lieu
That is correct.
and without further addressing the street.
That is correct.
Okay. So we would appear to be kicking the can down the road.
That is correct if you approve the variance. Right, but you have the ability to, if the commission chooses, you have the ability to amend the motion for the variance to contain a fee in lieu. All right. Commissioner Robinson.
Just that, I think that in this case, it sounds like we could deny this variance and it would come up again at a building permit, and as Mr. Weaver suggested, the same evaluation would be taken. If that's the case, then again, I see no point in approving this variance, and simply note that it's a desire of the commission and I think of the community to look for alternative ways to contribute broadly to redevelopment efforts, or we will continue to not see them or see them very much delayed in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hickle.
I had a question for Mr. Weaver.
Yes.
If ML&P were to scrap their plans right now, we have 3 individual lots. Could those lots be built on in any fashion and utilized without a variance?
Madam Chair, Mr. Hickle. The answer is yes. They could get a building permit and they could be constructed. They could be utilized. They may need utility infrastructure improvement. But let me just also tell the Commission there really is no need for variance in this particular case. The variance was processed erroneously because it really, if you read the code, it says peripheral improvements are discretionary. It's may. So you simply need to make the determination whether that peripheral and access improvement to the property is adequate. If it's not adequate, make a determination as to what degree it would be adequate, because it's every property we look at, there's a rational nexus requirement of how much the municipality can request of a property owner in making public infrastructure improvements. You may determine that a half street improvement is appropriate here in one location. That's your prerogative. But the infrastructure improvements that are in place, in our opinion, were adequate to the level of activity on this property.
Thank you. Commissioner Hickle.
I just wanted to further state that if there were 3 buildings built, houses or whatever's going to go on this thing you could have potentially 9 vehicles to and from every day. And what with MLP is proposing, the traffic level would drop from what its current subdivision allowances are. Is that a fair statement?
Madam Chair, Mr. Hickle, in proportion to what MLP's use is?
Yes.
MLP's use is going to be minimal. They're going to access this property minimally. There would probably be a higher level of use if it were developed. I believe I don't have the staff report in front of me, but I believe the property is zoned R3, which could allow quite a few units to be built there.
Well, I appreciate you helping me make that point. I'm okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Whitfield. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitfield. Have you determined the zoning?
Madam Chair, this property is zoned R4, multiple family residential district, which is a medium to high density. The surrounding area, the trailer park, is also zoned R4, which is medium to high density. I have had the opportunity to talk to the property owner. He anticipates redevelopment in 5 to 7 years, but it could extend out beyond 10 years. I tried to pin him down on exactly what kind of development he'd be proposing, and he said he doesn't really know on that. That would be determined by a number of different factors. So that's what I know about the development.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Secretary, as I understand it, we have no friendly amendment mechanism, so we would have to vote on the main motion and then amend it. Is that an offer an amendment? Is that not the situation?
The amendments come first.
Right.
Vote on the amendments, then you vote on the main motion.
The amendment to the variance
Correct.
request.
Correct.
All right. Thank you. So, is there an amendment that is being offered to the variance? Commissioner Pruse.
Well, I guess I'm a little fuzzy about all this. I think it sounds like the way to make it so that something will in fact happen is to require a half-street upgrade, period. It takes the question out from anybody downstream as far as whether or not there's a fee in lieu, whether or not there is any additional requirements at the time, subject to whoever's sitting in the seat deciding. Is that correct? Is that assumption? Is that half street? Would that work? I think Mr. Weaver said that we could decide that.
Madam Chair, Mr. Bruce, that's your decision. Your decision. If you believe that those improvements to that level are necessary, you certainly have the authority to require that.
All right. Thank you very much. Did you want to make a motion to that effect?
Well, I guess I can try and see where it goes, but I will make a motion for a half-street improvements because it gives certainty to the variance.
All right. Thank you. So there's a motion by Commissioner Pruse. Is there a second? He has pushed his button. All right. And it's been seconded by Commissioner Parks. Given the level of discussion, I think we should use our voting machines. The motion on the floor is to require a half-street. Would you use your machines?
Madam Chair, could you be clear as to where the half-street improvements are required?
I am assuming that it should be from Arctic to the most eastern portion of the property.
That's correct.
Okay. Would you use your machines, please? That motion passes. Now we're back to the main motion. Which is to approve case S11929-1, a variance from AMC 21.85 6.030A, improvement requirements by improvement areas subject to recording a suitable plat within 18 months of approval. Is that correct?
With the amendment.
With the amendment and the requirement to improve from Arctic to the most eastern portion of the property with a half street built to urban standards. May I have a motion on the floor? All right, is there an objection? We have a, well, I don't have in my queue. Okay. All right, it's been moved and seconded by whom?
It was seconded by Commissioner Parks.
All right, so it has been, and the motion was by Ms. Dean.
Ms. Dean, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Hickle.
I had a question of the Jerry Weaver, Mr.
Mhm.
If I could. Do they need this, does ML&P need this variance? If this thing were to pass as is with the amendment that a half street is required, could administratively, could they get what they need without using this variance?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Hickle, I'm not quite exactly sure of the question. You've already determined that, in essence, they have to construct the street to a higher level of standard, and that's part of your motion at this point in time.
Okay, I'm sorry if I misunderstood. I thought that we were simply amending the motion to require the half street, and now we're going to vote on the whole thing that will approve the variance with the requirement for the half street. So if we approve this whole shebang, do they even need to use it?
The variance provision?
Yeah, could they get the building built without it?
The way your motion's structured, they would have to construct it to the half-street standard.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ferguson.
Mr. Weaver, I think what Ray was trying to ask earlier, you made a comment that this variance request had actually been submitted in error, and they didn't need to.
Madam Chair, Ms. Ferguson, that's correct. They really didn't need variance. They submitted, I think, as a precautionary thing. Staff should have addressed it at the time. It came through, unfortunately, but as I pointed out, the boards and commissions, what they really, the peripheral improvements are discretionary. That's the reason the wording is may in there. But if you determine because of the level of impact of that property, and you need to look at this particular property, are you requiring something that has a rational nexus to its use? If you believe that's the case, that's what's in your motion.
But if this motion fails, the amendment to this motion goes away. And so if this motion fails, they can go back to the point where they don't really need the belt and suspenders.
Madam Chairman, Ms. Graves, is that where we are on the variance? Did they amending the variance? So if you're amending the variance and if the...
We've amended the variance first before we voted on the variance. That is correct.
I will not be supporting this motion because I don't think the half-street improvement is the right answer, and so I will not be supporting this. And I think that may allow them to put the substation in, which we need the substation. We don't want to lose sight that, if we don't have the substation, we may be working in candles here. So we need the substations, but I will not be supporting this because I believe that we don't need the half-street improvement because that's just, I don't think, correct. Thank you.
Just one moment. I'm sorry. Commissioner Parks?
Madam Chair, could the petitioner address that for the audience? Do you need that variance to make that work?
We need to address the protocol issue regarding that.
Why can't...
You may speak to staff. All right, all right.
Yeah. Just kill it.
Well, I don't know the difference.
So if they don't like what they do, they just don't do it?
Yeah,
Wasting my time.
yes. You should stay that. You should stay that.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
I need to clear the record. The applicant brought to my attention that they were told to request the variance. So it's not meant as disparaging on their processing. They were told to process the variance. It was an unnecessary variance, but Mr. Adams can speak to the issue of the need for improvements if that's your question to him.
So I'm confused. They were told to process the variance, but that the variance is unnecessary?
That's correct.
Is that what you just said?
That's correct.
Commissioner Cruz.
So, let me see if I get this right. We're wasting our time. And I guess if we vote for it, if it passes, they're required to do it. Is that correct? Am I reading this right? And if we don't vote, if it votes it down, they're going to do it. They'll still do it. Is that correct? Is this right?
I think the answer is they're going to do whatever they want to do because this is unnecessary.
Unless we
Yeah.
pass the variance. If we pass the variance, then
yeah,
we
I
have
think
to
that's-
adhere to what the variance says.
Including the half standard.
Okay.
I've been informed by the Secretary that although we can't take testimony, we may ask a question of the petitioner, so, and the petitioner's representative. So, Commissioner Parks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is, do you need this variance to build and get this substation online?
Madam Chair, Mr. Parks, a couple things. When we applied for the variance, it was at the direction that we needed that in order for the replat. So that was why we did that. Now, one thing to understand is in 2310-104, paragraph 104, the substation itself doesn't need a building permit. The utilities, including substations, are exempt from building permits. The only thing that requires a building permit here is a fence. So what you're exacting are this level of improvements, perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars of improvements for a fence. This, with respect to we're talking a trip a month, maybe, just to check the place out and see how it's doing. So, with respect to the proportionality, I guess, do keep that in mind. So that's what we're permitting here, is a fence. With respect to this variance, no, again, it was at the direction of staff, and the staff person simply, that was her understanding, and I don't want to disparage that staff, but so that's why we filed the permit.
So the answer to the question is you do not need this variance?
No.
Thank you.
All right. And would you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, Chair. Sorry. My name is Dwayne Adams with USKH. It's DWAYNE Adams. And I'm a representative of the petitioner in
All right.
MP.
And thank you. And who was the person working on your case?
Well, Mr. Whitfield worked on the case, but it was prior to that, and it was at the advice of a staff person. And
would you please state for the record who that staff person was? We can look it up. So
yes, Madam Chair, I'd rather that you get that right, and I'd rather not go there.
Mr. Weaver, who was the staff person that required this variance?
Madam Chairman, I haven't looked into it.
Thank you. Commissioner Parks, did you have, you're done? All right. So the motion before the commission is to approve the variance with the amendment. All right. And it has been moved and seconded by moved by Ms. Dean, seconded by Commissioner Parks. Would you please use your voting machine?
I'm not voting.
You have to vote.
No, I don't.
It's actually-
This is a variance, it's not required, we don't have to vote.
Just allow him to abstain. Well, I don't care. All right. That motion fails. Thank you very much. Now, we're back to we have to do the plat. So, we have unfinished business and action of the public hearings. This is case NS 11929-1, review for plat by the Planning and Zoning Commission. May we have the staff report?
We have the staff report before. We're at
Right.
deliberations now.
The public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the commission? Ms. Dean.
In the matter of S 11929-1, Northern Lights Subdivision Block A, Lot 7A, or Block 5, Lot 7A, I move to approve the subdivision of 3 lots into 1 lot, along with the department recommendations found in page 10 and 11 in our packet.
And seconded by Peter Mulcahy. Is there an objection to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, that motion is approved. May we have some findings of fact?
Madam Chair, this subdivision is necessary for the substation for ML&P. This is a new location for them that should alleviate problems that they've had. This subdivision is necessary for the substation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else? No, we're done. Thank you very much. All right, we are now moving on to Case 2011-104, the Municipality of Anchorage provisionally adopted Title 21 rewrite, Chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 13, and draft Chapter 14 in addition to the proposed amendments. This is not a public hearing. Before we begin our deliberations, I would just like to make a few comments. First of all, I would like to thank all the commissioners for the number of hours and work sessions that they have attended since last November. It has been an arduous task, and we're reaching the conclusions of our deliberations and discussions regarding these chapters. This commission is a broad-based commission, and we have 2 planners, we have a remodeler, we have a home builder, we have a general contractor, we have a commercial real estate investor, we have someone who's managed one of the largest military bases in the state of Alaska and in the Northwest. We have an engineer. And we have a recent addition of Commissioner Robinson, who is one of our 2 planners on the commission. Some of the deliberations and amendments that we're going to offer are going to be somewhat different than what staff and members of the community will have proposed. But I want everyone to know that these changes and amendments have not been taken lightly, and that I believe that they are reflective of the community in general. And I thank the commissioners for their time and effort and discussions up until this particular point in time. There is in your packet a resolution from the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce in support of the Title 21 rewrite expedited approval process. And I would just like to state for the record that we have worked diligently through the past 5 or 6 months to come to the point that we have in our deliberations this evening. And again, I believe that our amendments will be reflective of the community's best interests. So with that, I would entertain a motion for Chapter 4. Commissioner Hickle. Is that not where we are?
No.
I'm sorry. Chapter 3. I am having a hard time getting past the last page. All right. Commissioner Phelps, did you have something in the queue, or you were just reminding me?
No, I was
we're
just
on
going to remind
Chapter
you.
3? Thank you very much. Yes, do we have a mover and a motion and a second? Commissioner Phelps, and a second? Ms. Dean, thank you.
I would propose that the document that is titled PCC, Proposed Amendments to Chapter 3, Review and Approval Procedures, be adopted as presented in the material provided us by the consultant. It's this document right here. It was provided, I think, by email.
Could you go through the title again?
Sure. Would you want me to go through the major...
Hold it up again, or maybe
It's Chapter 3, and it says Proposed P&Z, PZC, Proposed Amendments to Chapter 3, Review and Approval Procedures, and identifies the amendments that we had discussed previously but not had taken action on at that time. This is the one that I have.
This is the one that you need to move. This is Chapter 3, and it's I got one. It's all been entered in here.
Okay.
This is
All right. I'm going to amend what I just suggested. Apparently, the information that I had is older information, and what I need to do... So the most recent information, can I ask Ms. Goodko a question? Because I kind of thought we were going to be going through this, actually. Is this what we have to take action on this evening?
We have 3 things that and I guess my recommendation is... now can you hear me? No?
Jesus.
Can you guys hear me if I... Okay. My recommendation is that we do what we did on the June 4th hearing, which is to...
Hello?
Okay. To go into the committee of a whole so the commission can discuss the chapters and then come out of the committee of the whole and actually vote. And with respect to each chapter, there's 3 things that need to be voted on. The first is the Planning and Zoning Commission's proposed amendments, which is the table that has the amendments that were generated out of the work session. The next thing that needs to be voted on is the combined table of amendments, which contains the recommendations of the Planning and Zoning Commission in the right-hand column as to whether to accept or reject the administration and prior Planning and Zoning Commission amendments. And then the third thing for each chapter is the red line, blue line draft, which shows the accepted administration amendments in red and the accepted Planning and Zoning Commission amendments in blue. But my first thought is that somebody should move to go into the committee as a whole so that there can be more informal discussion on the chapter before actually voting on those pieces.
I so move.
Just a quick point of order, Mr. Phelps, could you remove the initial, there was you and Commissioner Dean initially started to approve Chapter 3. We'll withdraw that.
I withdraw it, yes.
Thank you. Okay, so.
All right, it's been moved to go into the committee of the whole and was seconded by Commissioner Dean. Is there any objection to going into the committee of the whole? Seeing and hearing none, we are in the committee of the whole. Commissioner Phelps.
So can I ask Sally a question?
Certainly.
Okay. My understanding is that the amendments that we made some time ago, it seems like about 4 weeks ago, I could be wrong, that document, this is the one I'm holding right here, it contains all of the changes that we reviewed at that time, correct? And so what we have in that document are all the changes that we conceptually approved in the previous discussion, but on which we did not take any action. Okay? And so my understanding of what we need to do this evening is approve these amendments and then to go back to this table where it says proposed amendments to Title 21 from 2010 and 2011 and approve that, and finally to approve this large document that is called Chapter 2103, Review and Approval Procedures. Is that correct, staff? Sally?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. So what you have before you then are the changes that were captured in our previous discussions that are identified in the first piece of information, which is PZC Proposed Amendments to Chapter 3, Review and Approval Procedures. And in our previous review, we accepted those, and I believe we also accepted conceptually the changes that are identified, or the recommendations that are identified in this second table here, which is called Proposed Amendments to Title 21 from 2010 and 2011. And the last aspect is simply a capturing of all of those changes into the exact format of Title 2103. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
One other thing, there is an overview that was presented with respect to each chapter, and I think that the purpose of the overview was really to just kind of try to capture some of the highlights of the chapter, but I think that that would be helpful to have some general discussion on as background for the reasons underlying a number of the amendments.
Yes. And would someone like to speak to the general overview?
Yes, I would if I can find a piece of paper now. Yeah. No. It's the first piece of paper that I have. Darn it.
We're in the committee of the whole.
There it is. Okay. Well.
Terry, go ahead. Commissioner Parks.
Madam Chair, I think what we need, we're in the committee of the whole. It's my understanding that the reason that we're doing this is trying to get the procedural laid out for how we're going to handle each one of these chapters. Everyone, I think, has in front of them each one of the chapters as we've come out of our meetings with in our work sessions. Sally has put together for us a recap of those documents, and I think what we need to do is we need to understand how we are to present those, or at least in a retrospect of what we've done in the past. So if we have, as an example, Chapter 3, an introduction that will talk about the things that we discussed during our time of deliberation and in our work sessions before the deliberation, so that we could come to this meeting at least prepared to talk about those things and add if we needed to. And in the committee of the whole, it's my understanding we can have those kind of conversations, and then we have to come out of the committee of the whole and take each one of those chapters individually and address them. So I think at this point, the point would be is that I think everyone has Chapter 1 through 14 in front of them that was delivered to them. It's been worked over the last 5 months, actually, and that we need to at least prepare that. And I would recommend that when we come out of the committee of the whole, we take a few-minute recess to kind of recapture who's going to be able to do each one of those. So.
All right, thank you. You know, I think it might be appropriate at this particular point in time to take a brief 5-minute or 7-minute recess, and we'll be back. Thank you. All right, the Planning and Zoning Commission is back in session. Commissioner Parks.
Madam Chair, I'm going to make a motion that we come out of this committee of the whole.
All right, do I have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Ferguson. Do I see any objection? Seeing and hearing none, we're out of the committee of the whole. All right, what is the wish of the Commission as it relates to this case? Commissioner Parks.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we, in case number 2011-104, provisionally adopted Title 21 rewrite, chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 13, and 14. I would like to make a motion that we approve Chapter 6 as amended in the package that's before everyone.
May I have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Ferguson. Commissioner Parks, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, ma'am, I would. You know, we spend a lot of time with these tables, and we sometimes we get a little ahead of ourselves. But I think we've spent many hours in work sessions dealing with both professionals and among ourselves, looking at staff report and the existing provisional Title 21. And we've taken a lot of time and effort, energy, public testimony over that period of time, and the dimensional standards in Chapter 6 and measurements and general overview is a complicated factor of this whole piece. And I think there are lots of issues that came to light in the public hearing and in our discussions that were somewhat tattered at times, but and a lot of learning that happened over a period of time. You know, the standards for mixed use should incorporate into the zoning districts where the mixed use are allowed. We talked about if there was a one-story structure in a residential area, lot coverage should be increased to 40%. Height restrictions for neighborhood catability should be deleted. We talked about that particularly in the Midtown district. We talked about a lot of the issues that came from some of the standards that were in the provisionally adopted plan, and we made some changes to that. And in this particular case, we need to discuss the revised landscaping chart that is in the package. We've worked with the landscape architects and got staff's report on that. We've made several changes on that. We've talked about the amendments to that Mr. Robinson, Commissioner Robinson, has proposed on the table. We've looked at those. Those have been also included in this. As a land planner, he had some very lively discussions about how he thought things should be completed and changed to the better. We talked about the amendments on table, the Amendment 44 on the table of amendments, and we spent a lot of time on the design standard for single-family and two-family structures. And I think it is a general piece. We looked at this from the standpoint of the good of the city, the look of the city, and we talked about the economic structures of how these would make a difference in what it was. So I'd like to at least support the changes that have been made, and I would leave it up for further discussion.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Commissioner Park kind of mixed two different chapters. The landscaping and the development design standards is Chapter 7, and I think we should just discuss Chapter 6 at this point, which is just the dimensional standards and measurements, and then there's further things to discuss in Chapter 7.
Okay.
Thank you for the correction, Sally.
Yeah. Commissioner Ferguson.
I was going to make the same point.
All right. Thank you very much. Is there more discussion? So as I understand it, Commissioner Hickel.
The 40% lot coverage for single story, that's part of
Yes, it is.
Chapter 6. If I were to, and I have a question for Mr. Weaver. If this is eventually approved, would a single-story home with a basement still qualify as a single-story home? Does a basement count as a story? Or would it need to be amended to include that?
Through the chair, Commissioner Hickel, that is correct. The basement would not count as a story.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any more discussion as it relates to Chapter 6? Sally.
Yes, I think it would be a good idea, since there was not discussion at the work session, or it was very brief, if Mr. Hickel addressed his proposed amendment, which is in the chart, and it is drafted as amendment number 3. If you could just address that a little further, since that was kind of discussed at the end of one of the work sessions.
Through the chair, we have, I found, and many others have found, we have an aging population in Anchorage, and that population is growing. And the request we have for single-story homes is quite prevalent. But when we have a situation where you've got a 7,500 square foot lot, we end up with a very limited square footage, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 square feet, which is substandard these days, and maybe a small 2-car garage, if we can fit it. And it would very much benefit the public to have this 40%. If we can find an R2M lot that's in a desirable neighborhood, those are few and far between if we're building new construction, and it really is a find when you can do that. And going to 40% with the limited height of a single structure would be aesthetically pleasing and a benefit to the public.
Thank you very much. Are there other comments? Commissioner Parks, did you want to further clarify your, all right.
Madam Chair, I'd like to change my motion to make it more clear exactly what we want to do. Except for the changes proposed herein, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends approval of provisionally adopted Chapter 6 with the 2011 administration proposed amendments and the 2010 P&Z proposed amendments. Attached herein is redlined and blue-lined versions of Chapter 6, which reflects the administration amendments in red and the P&Zs in blue ink. Everyone has been given a copy of that, and we also have a copy for the record.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any objection to the motion? Is there any further discussion? Any additional findings of fact? Ms. Kuzkos.
I just want to make sure that in approving the motion, you are approving the general overview, the proposed amendments, the recommendations on the consolidated chart, as well as the red line, blue line version.
Yes, ma'am, that's my intention. It is part of the package.
Any objections? Seeing and hearing none, that is approved. Thank you. All right, we need to move on to another chapter. Is there another motion? Commissioner Phelps.
I would like to deal now with Chapter 3, if that's okay with the Commission.
All right, very good. Seconded by Ms. Dean.
The Commission has had discussions about the review and approval procedures that the municipality uses. These procedures are at the very heart of the decision-making process. What we found in the discussion is that many of the responsibilities and duties that were proposed to be transferred from the Planning Commission to the Urban Design Commission we believe to be inappropriate, and the tasks and functions that were to be proposed to be transferred were more precisely or better discharged by the Planning Commission. There are a number of particular aspects that we dealt with in the discussions of changes to this particular chapter, and what I'd like to do right now is mention some of those specific changes. First, we talked about the need for an applicant to hold a meeting with the Community Council. We also discussed the need or the inappropriateness of the director providing a waiver to the need to go to the community councils for discussion. We also changed the appeal action to more specifically indicate that there is the ability to have the decision of the director to be appealed to the board or commission that has the pertinent responsibility. We also made a change that indicated that rezonings may be initiated by the administration, not by planning department heads. Planning department heads of municipal departments, and rather than that, it would be by the administration instead, which is the current practice. We also discussed the various criteria for rezonings, and we found that certain changes were appropriate to consolidate those requirements and to make them more specific. We also, and most importantly, came to the conclusion that many of the duties and responsibilities that were proposed to be transferred to the Urban Design Commission were better discharged to the Planning Commission. And finally, we identified the process by which changes could occur in changes to the text of Title 21. It was recognized that there's a likelihood that many changes would be necessary because of some of the uncertainty associated with this particular title, and for the need for those changes to be made in an expeditious fashion. At the same time, there's also a need for the Planning Commission to be involved in that review process. And for those reasons that I specified, those changes were discussed, and they are embodied in this document that is called PZC, Proposed Amendments to Chapter 3, Review and Approval Procedures. So each of the amendments identified there were amendments that we reviewed and proposed. These amendments are reflected in the document that is proposed amendments to Title 21 from 2010 and 2011, and that document identifies the changes proposed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and also the changes that the Planning and Zoning Commission accepted that were part of the provisionally adopted Title 21. And finally, the changes that are identified in this red line, blue line version, or what's known as proposed amendments to Title 21 from 2010 and 2011 are captured in the whole text document that is called Chapter 2103, Review and Approval Procedures.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Commissioner Ferguson.
I would like to propose an amendment. I would like to propose an amendment to Mr. Phelps's proposal.
We don't have a motion on the floor. We have a motion to approve. We have a motion to approve Chapter 3.
He went into discussion of the overview, but he didn't.
Yes, he did.
Did I miss that?
Yeah, he made a motion, yes. All right, and it was seconded by Ms. Dean. All right. Okay, Commissioner Ferguson.
Okay, I handed out to the commissioners earlier this 5-page memo. On page 1 of the 5-page memo, there are four proposed amendments. I make a motion we insert those amendments.
Can I ask for clarification?
Yes?
Okay, what I have here, I'm not sure it's the same thing you're recommending, is Title 21 recommendations by chapter from Carr-Gosting Properties.
That's correct.
Okay, I do not accept that.
Okay.
And can I discuss the reasons why?
Okay.
Okay. The reason why is because I just got this today, and I haven't had a chance even to review it. I think that, in fact, if we want to make these changes, it'd be more appropriate for Carr-Gosting to make those proposals to the Assembly directly when they deal with this. But to provide the changes right now at the very end of this process, I wouldn't know what I'm voting on specifically. So, no, I won't accept that change.
What I think that might be appropriate that has been proposed by Commissioner Pruz in an informal discussion under those circumstances, that we provide an opportunity in our final meeting to propose amendments, which might give others an opportunity as well to propose additional amendments after further review of the documents.
That's fine.
All right, thank you. Would that be acceptable to you and the rest of the commission?
I'll accept that.
All right, thank you very much. All right. Commissioner Hickel, you're in the queue.
Thank you. I do appreciate all the concern the commission had for including the community councils, and I also appreciate the administration and their concern for streamlining development. I am supportive of the amendments, but is it clear in here, or can it be interpreted that an applicant could apply and not be held up through the application process if the community council did not meet at that particular time?
That's correct. We have a provision in there where if they can't go to the community council, they can have a general community meeting, but they have to provide a report to the director that explains the reasons why.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Parks.
Madam Chair, I would also like to mention that one of the things that we had long and arduous discussions about was the discussions about a time frame in which that we started the project of when the Title 21 came into be adopted and how that will impact the people that are out there doing subdivisions and doing all kinds of work and the rezoning and the review. And I think it should be noted that we realize that there's going to be a time frame. There's going to have to be changes made that once we get through it, we know that the 2 year to a 3 year time frame is going to be needed to make sure that we address all the issues that are going to be there. And I think we all as a commission realize that and understand there's going to have to be a way that these things can be expedited through the system.
Thank you. Other comments? All right, so Chapter 3 was moved for approval by Commissioner Phelps and seconded by Commissioner Dean. Thank you. Is there any objection? Seeing and hearing none, this motion is approved. Are there any additional findings of fact? Okay, thank you. Moving on. Commissioner Phelps.
I would like for the commission to discuss Chapter 4 zoning districts.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Is this a motion or?
Yes, I move that we accept the recommendations that are contained in the packets, which are the P&Z proposed amendments to Chapter 4 zoning districts and to the proposed amendments to Title 21 from 2010 and 2011 that identify both the changes from the Planning Commission as well as the changes from and that we accept from the provisionally adopted Title 21. And finally, the text specificity that reflects those changes that is in the final part of this packet, which is called Chapter 2104 zoning districts.
All right, thank you. And that motion was seconded by Ms. Dean.
I'd like to speak to this now.
Yes, please.
Okay. There has been considerable discussion about this particular chapter. Much of the discussion really focused on mixed-use development. It also focused on whether certain of the zones that were proposed inside Title 21 would be appropriate or whether they should be deleted. There are some pretty basic changes. Well, there are some basic changes that occur in this particular chapter. And more specifically, we moved to delete a number of proposed zones. One of these was R2F, the other was R4A, some mixed-use development. We also recommend adding a number of zones. We added B1B, and we changed the name of R3 and R4 to mixed residential. And we moved the RO district from commercial and mixed-use districts to residential districts. The rationale for deleting some of these districts is that much of what they can be accomplished could be achieved through changes to the existing districts. And in a number of those districts, we amended the uses that were allowed there and specifically allowed for mixed-use development in R3, R4, and B1A, B1B, and B3. The changes that we've identified allow for mixed-use development in these areas, and they're allowed as a matter of right. You do not have to go through a rezoning process to actually utilize the mixed-use standards. The developer, if they wish to, can utilize the standard as a matter of choice. We made these changes to, I think, generally attempt to maintain the existing code as much as possible and to also integrate the existing code with mixed-use development concepts. The other aspects of this particular chapter deal with the specific requirements in mixed-use development and the specific standards for that. And we had discussed that at some depth at the time, and our discussions, as I recall, indicated that it would be wise to utilize the existing zoning districts to the extent possible and to revise those districts to provide for mixed-use development in certain instances. So for these reasons, it made sense to modify this particular chapter to achieve those purposes. And those purposes I have described and are detailed in specific actions in the 3 packets that I had previously described at the beginning of this discussion.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Commissioner Parks.
Yes, Madam Chair. I think there was a significant amount of conversation when we were talking about this also about the negative impact on properties and the adverse effect upon the tax base in the city. And the other thing that we talked about at considerable length was the difficulty of mixed-use financing in current sources and sources to be in the future. It's not something that's been accepted in the financial world at this point in time. And to use the existing code that we understand, most of the mixed use, I would agree with Mr. Phelps, or Commissioner Phelps, that the changes that we've made are relatively small in the results from the standpoint of the changes that will be in the city over what they would have been if we had all the mixed zones in the code.
All right, thank you very much. Any other comments? Commissioner Hickle.
As far as the discussion and financing, we've learned from several members of the commission about the difficulty, if not improbability, of getting mixed-use financed. And it was the feeling of the commission and the other members that the lending world the pendulum has swung 180 degrees, and nobody really felt that was going to change anytime soon. If it did and if it will, it's probably going to be a very long-term process, and to take that into account when considering mixed use and whether it would be voluntary or mandatory.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Ferguson.
I think the point to be made is we've not prohibited mixed use. We've made it an option. It's still there. If somebody wants to use it, they can use it, but they don't have to use it.
That's correct.
All right, thank you very much. Any other comments? Are there any objections to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, that is approved. Thank you. Commissioner Phelps.
I would like for the Commission to discuss Chapter 5, Use Regulations.
All right, thank you. Seconded by Ms. Dean.
The items that we are talking about this evening are specifically identified as PZC, Proposed Amendments to Chapter 5, Use Regulations, and then the proposed amendments to Title 21 from 2010 and 2011 to integrate the integration of Planning Commission amendments and those aspects of Title 21 provisionally adopted that the Commission has accepted, and then finally the text of Chapter 4 itself that integrates all of these recommended changes, both that from the Commission as well as from the provisionally adopted 21 that the Commission has accepted. So those are the issues, or those are the recommendations I'm going to speak to the Commission about. One of the principal changes that occurred was to simplify the table of allowed uses. It consisted of, I forget the number of tables actually, maybe it was 4 or 5, and it was, from my perspective, it was very difficult to interpret and to use. And what we've done basically is taken it down to a simple table that basically identifies all the activities and whether or not the uses would be allowed or prohibited inside a particular section of the particular zoning code. And now I'm trying to find that. Yeah, okay. So if you were to look into proposed amendments to Chapter 5, Use Regulations, and you were to get to the middle portion of that, you would see a new table. That's this integrated table that I was mentioning. And this table was essentially crafted to integrate much of the information that was scattered amongst previous other tables inside the provisionally adopted Title 21. It basically is a fairly straightforward statement of the type of uses that are allowed in particular zoning districts, and it's specified in terms of permitted uses, conditional uses, and whether a site plan is required, either small scale or large, which is identified by M. There was considerable discussion about this particular table, and frankly there has been amendments to it that I think have improved the quality of what the original table was. One aspect was that we identified in terms of residential uses that used to be able to occur in the B3 in the residential districts are still allowed to continue. So for example, RO and B3 had residential uses as a type of use that was allowed. That was not the case in the provisionally adopted code, and so it was changed to allow for those things to occur. We also made a change as a result of discussions in terms of group living. We actually felt that it would be appropriate to break out assisted living facility between 3 and 8 residents and 9. Actually, that goes back to the original recommendation in the provisional title. We also found that in terms of adult care, it was appropriate to break it between adult care facilities 1 through 8 and 9 or more. And again, that goes back to the provisional table, and we found that, in fact, you have to deal with adult uses in a very definitive way, and the provisionally adopted Title 21 did that effectively. We also made changes to the section on industrial uses and retail uses, and specifically some of the retail uses were consolidated, and some of the uses that were in manufacturing were essentially transferred over to retail. That didn't mean they were disallowed. It just meant that we felt that those uses were better positioned in commercial than in manufacturing. And finally, in terms of the industrial uses, it was pointed out that in terms of the subcomponent called waste and salvage, that many of these uses should be conditional uses, particularly inside the PLI zone, and that seemed like a reasonable modification as well, too, and so we accepted that modification as well. So this particular table has gone through a series of revisions, and the table now, I believe, reflects a better understanding of what the uses, what appropriate uses would be inside the community and how they should be allowed or not allowed. That is really the real focus of the changes in this particular chapter that we are proposing. The changes are integrated or shown in various parts of the chapter, but the real heart of the changes is inside this table. So, and I should also mention, too, the table reflects the changes that we recently adopted for the zoning districts in Chapter 4. So there's a linkage between the recently adopted Chapter 4 requirements and the new Chapter 5 requirements. So we have an integration that previously didn't exist that we now have.
Thank you, Commissioner Phelps, for those comments, and thank you also for all the supplemental time that you spent working on these last few chapters. It's greatly appreciated by everyone on the Commission. Are there other comments?
Yes, ma'am. Point of order, please. Commissioner Phelps, when you began your discussion, you began with a statement that you wanted to discuss Chapter 5, but it wasn't a clear motion statement to approve Chapter 5, even though Chair Yoshimura identified you as the mover and a seconder. Could you please state for the record a clear motion?
Well, actually I did, but I'll restate it. Basically what I said is that I would move for the adoption of 3 component packages. One is the PZZ proposed amendments to Chapter 5 use regulations, the document called proposed amendments to Title 21 from 2010 and 2011, and finally the actual text to Chapter 5 that integrates the changes that are identified in the 2 previous documents.
Thank you. And that motion was seconded by Ms. Dean. All right. Commissioner Hickle, did you have, in the queue?
I can ask mine now, or Sally can go. That's fine. I just
Go ahead.
mine really wasn't a question. It was more of a statement.
Go right ahead.
I do appreciate the amendments and what Bruce is explained. There are just a multitude of definitions here, which to me would beg the question: if you don't fall in a specific definition, then does it go? It goes to the administration and adds more. Probably uncertainty or subjectivity, and by consolidating, making more generalized uses in the planning portion of this, that if you could allow one specific use, and the intent was that use, whether if it was changed by slight definition, would fall under these tables, and I hope it's late and I'm getting tired, but anyway, simple is good. If you got something simple that everybody can look at it and say, okay, this is what you can do, and it's fairly obvious to just about anybody that this is what you can do, then it provides clarity. People can deal with that, and I appreciate that. Sorry, it took me so long to say that.
I think that was Bruce's intent, yes, to provide that clarity, so thank you. Ms. Kuzkos.
Thanks. One thing I wanted to point out is that if you look at the chart, Amendment 20, you still need to address accessory dwelling units in the R1, R1A, R3, and R4. The chart that is attached does not allow those in those districts, but there was discussion at the work sessions, and I didn't think that that had been decided one way or another. Specifically, there were discussions whether ADUs should be allowed in certain geographic zones or not. And I left, if you look at on the chart, Amendment 20, I really said that at this point you need to decide what you're going to do on that issue.
Yes, thank you very much. What might be appropriate? Commissioner Robinson and then Commissioner Parks.
Thanks, Madam Chair. That was actually a work session that I did attend, so I do recall that discussion. And I think the discussion was we needed to determine that geographic area. I don't think, unless someone is prepared to define that, it sounded like you had another item that was going to be held over till the end. I don't think it's appropriate that we sit here and try to muddle through a map at this point.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Parks.
Madam Chair, that's exactly what I was going to say. We're going to have one more session. That'll be the appropriate time to handle those kind of issues that I think.
All right, thank you very much.
And I should specifically say, too, I did not deal with that particular table.
Right. All right, thank you very much. Is there any more discussion? Commissioner Ferguson. Push your button. Thank you.
Is the prior document said if it wasn't specifically allowed, it was prohibited. And that comment has now been removed, and so it opens it up to a much broader interpretation, which I think is good. I think it allows it to be a more workable document.
All right, thank you very much. Any other comment? Ms. Kuzkos.
I would just make one other comment, and that is that there are specific provisions in this chapter that have been deleted in the proposed amendments because of the deletion of residential design standards, that depending on how you decide tonight on whether or not you're going to have the residential design standards, if you are, then that would affect 2105-030 A2BII and 2105-030 A4B, which are the last two noted amendments on the chart. So those will depend on what you do in Chapter 7.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, that motion is approved. We are ready to move on to another chapter. Do we have a motion? Could we have a motion, please? Commissioner Parks.
Madam Chair, I would make the motion except for the changes proposed herein. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommends approval of the provisionally adopted Chapter 7 with the 2011 administration proposed amendments and the 2010 proposed amendments attached herein, and is red-lined and blue-lined version of Chapter 7, which reflects the administration amendments in red ink, and in the P&Z's amendments in the blue ink.
All right. And that's been seconded by Commissioner Pruz. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, ma'am, I would. Both public and private streets should be allowed, and private streets should be allowed when there are homeowners association to maintain and repair them. That's one of the discussions that we spend a lot of time with. Wetlands management should be under control and should not be repealed in Title 21. If there's any change in the wetland management, it should not necessitate amendment to Title 21. Approval and development of activities may be conditioned upon obtaining necessary federal permits and approvals for those permits, and the approval should not have to be obtained first. Obtaining the permits before obtaining final approval would result in delays. It's one of the things that we probably had one of the most discussions about is how important it is to get moving on a process and making it easy for the developers. Stream corridors have been lessened. A wildlife corridor has been lessened. The size of disturbance envelope has been increased. There's been more flexibility in the building on slopes, less private and open space required, though still plenty in our estimations. Sidewalks are only required on one side of the street and not at all in cul-de-sacs. Snow storage was a very large topic, especially in the winter that we had last year on where to put snow, how to have it, and those options. Landscaping has been revised. Landscaping units are very difficult to understand or not user-friendly. Landscape architects worked an easily and understandable criteria. We spent hours talking about the references to trees and shrubs that are easy into a more easy and understandable language. Allow an alternative equivalent compliance with respect to landscaping. Not every site lends itself to square planting areas. Sometimes accumulation of that space is more appropriate than smaller spaces. Dumpster screening, we talked a lot about that, and provisions of refuge collections, receptacles may be impossible in some locations, especially in some of the R4 environments. Building design standards for single-family and two-family residential structures. Some design standards are needed. These design standards should provide the maximum amount of flexibility. We also talked a lot about the design criteria manual, and one of the recommendations that we made was that the design criteria manual is a form of a regulation and should be submitted to the Assembly for approval. We feel like that is being used as a tool, not necessarily a bad tool. It just needs to be approved and make sure that it has some approval process as it goes through it. And it needs to be updated every couple of years with some public input, not just by the administration. And those are the comments basically that we spent while we dealt with Chapter 7.
Thank you. Do we have any further comments from commissioners? And from our consultant, Ms. Kuzkos?
I just wanted to point out a couple things. One thing is in your packet at the work session, the last work session on Monday, there were some changes to the landscape table that were proposed. And so in your packet, I presented the document showing those changes. So you need to look at those and make sure that that's what you want. Also, the surety provision that was discussed at the work session, which is listed as a new amendment 85 on the table of amendments, that just came up at Monday night's work session. and that's included as Amendment 85. And then there are a number of new amendments that Commissioner Robinson suggested, but since he wasn't able to attend the work session on Monday, we went ahead and included them in the amendment chart, but the request was to have him address those amendments this evening so that you could then decide whether they should be incorporated into the red line, blue line draft, because they are not incorporated. The amendments starting at 85 are not incorporated at this time. And two other comments I would make. One is that you need to discuss the inclusion of the residential design standards for single-family and two-family structures. That was not a clear-cut consensus in the work sessions. And also, you had noted with respect to Amendment 44 in the table that you wanted to address this again and have further discussion on this amendment relates to changing from 10% to 5% or maybe eliminating the requirement for the snow storage area. So those all should be addressed in connection with this chapter.
Thank you. Could you repeat again where Commissioner Robinson's amendments are?
Yes, they're in a handout that came in today's packet. It's a two-page addition to the existing table of amendments for Chapter 7, and they start with Amendment 86, and they go from Amendment 86 to Amendment 91.
Thank you.
85?
Pardon?
Yes.
85, not 86?
Yes, 85 is the amendment that was discussed at the work session regarding the landscape surety, and then starting with 86 are Mr. Robinson's proposed amendments.
Commissioner Parks.
Madam Chair, I would like to request that we address those at our next meeting. I think it would be easier if we did that and then everybody would be on the same sheet of music.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Robinson, would that be acceptable to you?
That'd be fine.
All right, thank you very much. Are there other comments and discussion about Chapter 7? Commissioner Hickle.
So does that mean we table Chapter 7?
No.
This time?
It just simply...
Just the amendments?
Just the amendments that have been proposed by Commissioner Robinson, because we have not had adequate time to review them, and so we will review them at our last meeting for Title 21, which I'm hopeful to have on July 11th. Which is when we're going to have the public hearing for Chapter 10, and I'm hopeful, based upon our workshop, our work session that we had on Monday night, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to take the public hearing, have our deliberations on Chapter 10, do our approval process, and then deal with any amendments, because to the best of my knowledge, there is nothing else on the agenda for July 11th. Is that correct, Mr. Weaver?
That's July 9th, and that's the Chapter 10.
I'm sorry, July 9th.
That's the only thing on your agenda.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Ferguson.
Chapter 7 includes design standards. Anchorage 2020 and the community wanted design standards, and I'm speaking specifically to commercial buildings at this point. Design standards were discussed at great length, and trying to come to design standards that were acceptable to the architectural community, acceptable to the development community, and provide the protection the people wanted was a challenge, was a very big challenge. And we went to the design standards that exist on the commercial buildings, because they were understood by the community and they were working with the community and the professionals were used to dealing with them, as opposed to the risk of unintended consequences of writing a new section of design standards. So this document does include design standards on commercial buildings, which is per Anchorage 2020 and per the request of the community at the public hearing.
All right, thank you very much. Are there other comments? And seeing and hearing none, then this motion is approved. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Can I just have a clarification? The amendment table as written changes the snow storage from 10% to 5% and does add single-family residential design standards for single-family residential structures and for two-family, and I just want to make sure that that is the intent to include those.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion for Chapter 8. Okay, Commissioner Phelps.
Madam Chairman, I would request that the Commission review Chapter 8. What I am proposing is the approval of the amendments that are identified in the document PZC, Proposed Amendments to Chapter 8 Subdivision Standards. I would also move for the approval of the document Proposed Amendments to Title 21 from 2010 and 2011 that integrates the recommended changes by the Planning Commission with the provisionally adopted Title 21 that is acceptable to the Commission. And finally, with the textual changes that reflect the previous document in the Chapter 2108 called Subdivision Standards.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, I would like to talk to this just a bit. I think in large part the subdivision standards were found to be generally adequate. They've been functioning for a long period of time. They have been used. They're well known to the developing community, and the changes that were proposed or are being proposed reflect, I would describe it, refinements of the overall subdivision standards that the municipality has applied for many, many years. Some of the things that we believe to be appropriate for change are noted in the first document. And one of the things that was important is to recognize that the standards of this chapter, meaning Chapter 8, apply in the event of a conflict between the comprehensive plan and this title. There needs to be a specificity that this particular title, well, and we also make this comment in other chapters as well, but that the specific requirements that are detailed in a particular chapter and specifically inside this one apply, and if there's a conflict between the two documents, that the specific requirements apply in that particular instance. There was discussion about the need to provide flexibility for multi-phase projects with the ability for a developer to either choose in a latter stage of a multi-stage project to use the existing standards at the time of the initial approval or the standards that would then apply with the new provisionally adopted Title 21. It was the feeling of the Commission that it would be appropriate to allow for the development to occur under existing standards, but if there was an advantage to the developer and to the community to use the provisionally adopted Title I standards that had been adopted at that time, to let those be used as well. There is other changes that were significant. The originally adopted provisionally adopted Title 21 had the requirement for a geotechnical investigation pretty much for all types of development, and specifically for most forms of, I would describe as being larger development. The feeling of the Commission is that that requirement was somewhat onerous and that The need for a geotechnical commission, geotechnical investigation is appropriate if necessary to public health and safety, but it should be required by the commission that's reviewing that particular development and not have it required as just a matter of every instance that the development comes up. So if in a review of a development or a project, there is apparent need for a geotechnical investigation, we now have the authority to do that. We did not have the authority to do that previously. There was another chapter or section of this chapter that deals with connectivity to public lands, and there was some amount of discussion on this, and essentially what I have recommended in a clarifying amendment is that we reword this particular section to make it clear in terms of access to Chugach State Park and how to distinguish that from other areas. And we adopted very specific language that reflected those changes. Another major change that occurred, and we're recommending, is that again, in the instance where there's a conflict between the design standards of this chapter and the design criteria manual, that the design standards in this chapter, meaning subdivision chapter, apply. So it's obvious if there's a conflict, the conflict is resolved in terms of the requirements of this particular chapter. And there are other aspects as well, but one of the important ones, too, was the discussion we had about design criteria manual. This has been commented on previously, and essentially our recommendation is that this particular urban design manual be reviewed by the Assembly and adopted. It may be a very worthwhile document, but it needs to go through a review and approval process because it's a type of regulation that needs that type of review and discussion. So those are the major changes that the Commission has recommended. They're essentially refinements to the code and provide for additional precision and clarity.
Thank you, Commissioner Phelps. Are there any other comments from the commissioners regarding this matter? Commissioner Phelps, I just wanted one point of clarity, which is it is the choice of the developer to decide whether or not he wants to go with his original approval of entitlements versus the new requirements.
That's correct. It's
right.
his choice or the developer's choice.
Yes, thank you very much.
So he has that choice, and the administration cannot force it upon him.
All right, thank you. Are there any other comments? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, that motion is approved. At this particular point in time, I think it might be appropriate for us to have a little discussion about our schedule for the future. I need some clarity in terms of whether or not we have the right, if we approve this last chapter, if we're finished with our Title 21 rewrite, or if we should hold this last chapter open until July 9th so that we're free to make any of our amendments. Commissioner Phelps.
Just a question of clarity. Is that Chapter 14 we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm wondering if someone has an answer. Mr. Weaver?
Madam Chairman, the question?
The question is, if we move on to Chapter 14, and that concludes all of our chapters except for Chapter 10, which we're scheduled to have another public hearing on. And so my question is, should we, if we want to make amendments to the chapters that we have already approved, if we move on to Chapter 14, does that close our deliberations, or should we be holding Chapter 14 so that we can deal with amendments?
Madam Chairman, my recommendation is to leave it open so you can make those amendments.
All right. Thank you very much. So for this evening, I think we will conclude our deliberations on the provisionally adopted chapters of Title 21 and leave Chapter 14 open. So what we will be doing then on July 9th is we will be dealing with the public hearing on Chapter 10 and hopefully some deliberations after the close of the public hearing. And then we will be dealing with Chapter 14 and any amendments that we choose to have on any of the chapters. Does that sound like a reasonable plan moving forward? All right. Commissioner Parks, did you have something in the queue? All right, thank you. Madam Secretary, did you have a comment?
Yes, I did. I believe at the last meeting, when we went through the first chapters, there were no findings made on Chapter 2. And so at the next meeting, or this evening, I have the cover sheet if you do not.
Ms. Koskos.
My understanding is that that I'll be drafting a resolution that will be signed by the Commission or decided by the Commission, approved by the Commission, that will be incorporating these documents, and that the documents will basically suffice as the findings of fact. I had a discussion with Mr. Wheeler at the last meeting regarding that.
All right, thank you.
I would have to listen to make sure they incorporated in when they made their motion for clarification. And I have not listened to those minutes again yet.
So do you want to have some, perhaps we could have some brief findings of fact for Chapter 2. Commissioner Phelps.
Why can't we do the findings of fact now?
For Chapter 2.
For Chapter 2?
Yes, we may.
Can I do that?
Yes, please. That was my recommendation. Thank you.
So I would propose, I don't have the documents here. I would propose that we accept, in the case of Chapter 2, the recommended proposed amendments to Chapter 2 for boards, commissions, and municipal administration, that we adopt the proposed amendments to Title 21 from 2010 and 2011 that reflect the administration changes and provisionally adopted Title 21, as well as those recommended changes by the Planning Commission. And finally, I move that we adopt the reflection of these changes in the actual text document for that chapter, more specifically Chapter 2102, Boards, Commissions, and Municipal Administration. Can I speak to that?
Yes.
In this particular chapter, we dealt with boards and commissions, and we dealt with powers and duties of the various commissions. One of the things that we particularly were concerned about were the decision-making authorities that were appropriate for the various boards and commissions. One of the things that we really did have a fundamental concern about was the authority transfer from the Planning and Zoning Commission to the Urban Design Commission. And the Urban Design Commission was proposed to have very substantial review and approval authority. In the changes that were made to that particular section of code, we recommended that those transfers not occur and that the Planning and Zoning Commission retain the authority for such decisions. We also made changes to aspects of powers and duties of the Planning Board and made additional specifications of their authorities. And then finally, in terms of the decision-making authority in terms of the Assembly, we made clarity statements about public facility site selection. So those are the major changes that we discussed at that time, and the principal recommendation from the Commission as it pertains to this chapter deals with the transfer of authority between the Urban Design Commission, from the Planning and Zoning Commission to the Urban Design Commission, which we did not agree to be appropriate.
All right, thank you. And those are your findings of fact. It is not a motion. Yes.
Right.
All right, thank you. Ms. Kuskos, several of the commissioners have asked if you could put a packet together of all of the proposed amendments that, which would include those from Commissioner Robinson and others, and if you could put that packet together for us and then let us know when it's available for delivery. We'll get it circulated to the commissioners. If possible, we would like to have that in plenty of time for our July 9th meeting. There may be other amendments that various commissioners may want to propose. I would ask the commissioners that if they do have additional amendments for any of the chapters, that we forward those amendments to Ms. Kuskos, our consultant, and that they be available for circulation no later than July 2nd. Okay? Commissioner Phelps.
Madam Chairman, I just realized I missed an important aspect of findings for Chapter 2. Can I add that in now?
You may.
Okay. One of the things that we talked about and were concerned about was the absence of the ability to appeal the director's decision. It did not always specify that, in fact, there was the ability to appeal. That was changed as a fundamental basis of fairness. And if it is not otherwise specified, the appeal of a director's decision, which is usually of administrative type, will go to the applicable board or commission. We felt that change was appropriate and a fundamental test of fairness that we thought was appropriate.
Yes, indeed. I remember that discussion. Thank you, Commissioner Phelps. Any other comments? I would entertain a motion for adjournment. Commissioner Parks.
Make a motion to adjourn.
All right, and I have a second. Do I have a second? Seconded by Ms. Dean. All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.